Darkness. It hit consciousness before anything else, an utter void, absent of sensation, time, or memory. Then, slowly, a pounding heartbeat. A coldness in the veins, an exhalation that felt too real to be a dream. Through the haze came a single thought. Who am I? A prickle of static. The darkness receded in flickers, like dying neon, revealing the silhouette of a sealed, windowless room. Metal walls glowed with a dull, sterile light. The air was dense, suffocating. A series of soft beeps emanated from somewhere overhead. It was then that the figure realized he was strapped to a chair, chest, wrists, and ankles bound by snug metal clamps. Panic surged as he tried to wrench free. A robotic voice chimed in. Detention subject recognized. Initialization complete. In that singular moment, the man could not recall a single detail of his name, history, or purpose. His mind was a tangle of confusion. All he understood was this. He was a prisoner in a place he did not recognize, with no memory of the crime that had led him here. After a moment, the clamps retracted. The prisoner nearly fell forward, arms free, heart pounding. A circular panel in the floor slid open, revealing a dull metal corridor. He stumbled to his feet. Tremors rattled his frame, a mild wave of nausea washing over him. The air smelled faintly of ozone, as if everything had recently been disinfected by electric currents. He moved into the corridor, each step echoing. Tiny cameras lined the walls, their red lights watching his every move. The corridor ended at a door that slid open by itself as he approached. The man's instincts demanded he tread carefully, but curiosity drove him forward. Beyond the door was a large chamber lit by neon blue panels in the ceiling. Holographic banners rippled in the air, displaying a motto in blocky text: Rehabilitation through Reformation. All around him, similarly dressed men and women moved in rigid lines. They wore identical beige jumpsuits, each labeled with a series of digits. They carried expressions of hollow resignation, as though they had long accepted the reality of their fates. A mechanical hum overhead announced the floating presence of a sentinel. A spherical drone covered in rods and antennas, drifting like a silent warden. It scanned the prisoner's face with a staccato beam of blue light, then hovered away. Disoriented, the prisoner attempted to speak to the nearest individual, a petite woman with haunted eyes and parted lips. "Excuse me," he whispered. "Can you tell me where we are?" She stared at him as if searching for recognition. She opened her mouth, but her voice was a trembling hush. "You don't remember, do you?" He shook his head. She nodded in sympathy. "Welcome to the maze," she whispered. "We're in the Digital Correctional Center. They say we all committed crimes, but—" She trailed off, as if uncertain whether to trust him or if she dared to speak further. Her eyes darted around, scanning for watchers beyond the sentinel. Then, with finality, she turned and walked away. His attempts to follow were interrupted by an unseen force, as if he'd hit a wall of static in the air. "Detainees are not permitted to congregate." The overhead drones spoke in unison. "Return to your designated sectors." He gazed helplessly at the woman's receding form. In the confusion, a floor panel underfoot lit up, guiding him toward another corridor. With no better option, he followed the illuminated path. The corridor led him to a sprawling labyrinth of narrow walkways and locked doors, each marked by a different set of glowing icons. Some corridors led to what looked like bare dormitories, others to flickering, half-finished illusions, a forest path receding into blackness, a beach leading nowhere. It was disorienting, as if the structure itself was half-formed from code. Here and there, other detainees milled about in docile silence. Occasionally, a flicker in the walls revealed the faint grid lines of digital architecture. That was when the man fully understood. He was inside a virtual prison. Not a metaphor, not a dream, but some hyper-advanced, simulated environment. The lines of reality blurred with every step. But what had he done to end up here? He stopped at a heavy, sliding door, labeled with the number 57 in holographic letters. As he reached out, the door recognized him and swooshed open. Inside was a cramped cell containing a single cot and a small table. The walls were grey, pulsing with faint neon lines. Although it looked fairly normal at first glance, glimpses of digital distortion crawled in the corners, flickering like dying pixels. He sank onto the cot. No memory, no clues. The only thing he had was a dull sense of dread. At some point, the overhead lights flickered, signifying a shift in schedule. A moment later, the door hissed open, and a synthetic female voice instructed him. Detainee 9630, please report to the orientation chamber. His wrists were still sore from the restraints. He rose cautiously and stepped back into the corridor. Another illuminated path guided him to a large hall where a massive screen covered the far wall. The space looked like a cross between a futuristic lecture hall and a digital amphitheater. Rows of detainees stood facing the screen, which displayed a rotating symbol of the prison authority. As he joined the back row, the symbol vanished, replaced by a man's face. Piercing eyes, salt and pepper hair slicked back. The face looked artificially perfect, as though touched up by a dozen digital filters. Greetings, new arrivals, the face said, voice smooth and assured. You have all been convicted of crimes that the justice system has deemed severe enough to warrant virtual detention. Here you will undergo reformation. Your memories, your impulses, everything that made you an offender will be recoded, refined, until you can re-enter society as a model citizen. The prisoner clenched his fists. His body tensed as something about this man's face stirred an unfamiliar rage in him, an anger he could not rationally place. The face continued. For many, your memory has been partially or completely wiped. This is normal, a standard precaution to accelerate your rehabilitation. He paused, as if reading the tension in the crowd. Should you have questions, know that all will be answered in due time. Your only task now is to comply with daily tasks and reflect on your wrongdoing. We shall shape your mind anew. A final flicker, and the screen went dark. The detainees dispersed in silence. Overhead, the sentinel drones hovered, ensuring everyone obeyed the unspoken commands. The man closed his eyes, feeling an overwhelming sense of injustice. He might have committed a crime, but the notion of being forcibly stripped of all memory, of identity itself, seemed monstrous. And if his mind was to be recoded, how could he trust that what they told him about his crime was true? Days blurred together, or at least what passed for days in a place where there was no real sun, no real night. The artificial light dimmed and brightened at fixed intervals. The man known only as Detainee 9630 was forced into menial tasks, scrubbing digital illusions of flaws that sometimes faded into bright pixelation, stacking crates that weighed more or less depending on how the code fluctuated. Yet he saw glimpses of something deeper, glitches in the environment, walls that briefly disappeared, revealing corridors behind them, shadows of unknown figures in reflective surfaces, flickering out in an instant. One evening, while returning to his cell, he noticed a dim light flickering in an unmarked door at the end of the corridor. Intrigued, he approached, pressing his ear to it. He heard hushed voices. Cautiously, he slipped inside. In the small hidden alcove, a ragtag group of detainees huddled around a contraption that appeared to be part high-tech terminal, part mechanical puzzle box. The petite woman he had met earlier lifted her head sharply, eyes full of alarm, but then she seemed to recognize him. "You're the new one," she said quietly, pressing a finger to her lips in a signal to keep quiet. "Close the door." He did so, heart hammering in his chest. The group regarded him warily. One man, with a cybernetic implant in place of an eye, spoke first. "If you're going to report us, get it over with. We can't hide from the Watchers forever." The detainee raised his hands, stepping back slightly. "I'm not here to turn anyone in," he promised. I don't even know why I'm here. I just want answers." "You have no memory?" the woman asked. "None at all." He shook his head. "Only flashes of, I don't know, emotion, sensations, but no real events." The group shared glances, as if assessing the risk. Finally, the woman nodded. "I'm Shay," she introduced. "This is Marco." She nodded toward the man with the cybernetic eye. "And this," she pointed at the small group, "is the rest of our little rebellion." "Rebellion?" the detainee echoed in a whisper. Shay leaned forward. "We're not convinced all of us deserve to be here. Or if we do, the punishment doesn't match the crime. We think there's more going on in this digital prison beyond just rehabilitation. People have been disappearing, quietly removed from the maze. No one knows where they go or why." Marco added, "We've tapped into a few lines of code. This entire place has sublayers locked away. Sometimes, if we're lucky, we can intercept messages from the outside. We believe someone powerful is profiting from confining us here, maybe selling our neural data, maybe worse." He paused, eyeing the detainee carefully. "If we trust you, we could use another set of hands. But this isn't just about escaping. It's about exposing the truth. To do that, we need to hack deeper into the prison's architecture. But we need a unique access key. Word is, every new prisoner holds a partial key hidden in their mind, especially those with complete memory wipes." Shay nodded. "That's why so many new arrivals have no memories. The system hides the encryption in our neural implants, burying it under lost recollections. Only by unlocking your mind can we gather those fragments of the key and break open the maze." The detainee's throat went dry. There was an odd sense of purpose in this. Maybe his missing memories contained a crucial piece of the puzzle. Maybe it could free them all and help him learn what, if anything, he'd done to deserve this fate. When he agreed to help, the group gave small smiles, fleeting but genuine. In this bleak realm, any sign of hope was precious. Days became weeks, if one could even measure time in this place. Detainee 9630 joined Shay, Mako, and the others in their covert quest. Whenever he could, he slipped away from assigned tasks to meet them in that hidden alcove. The contraption in the corner hummed softly, an amalgam of scavenged parts from defunct drones and hacked terminals. Through trial and error, they discovered it could interface with the detainees' neural implants to extract fragments of their encrypted data. The detainee had the first session. He winced at the jolt that went through his skull as Mako connected thin cables behind his ear. The contraption's screen flickered, lines of code scrolling rapidly. A stinging sensation tingled in the base of his neck. Suddenly, a swirl of color danced behind his eyelids. He saw images, disconnected, fleeting. A red door. A swirl of holographic text. The face of the man from the orientation, lips twisted into a predatory smile. Then, a feeling of panic, of something precious being stolen away. Flashes of light, blood on the floor. Then, silence. He jerked awake to see Shay and Mako watching him carefully. "What did you see?" Shay asked gently. He rubbed his temples. I'm not sure. I think I saw a door, and there was blood." His voice cracked. "But it's all so jumbled." Mako sighed, his mechanical eye whirring. "The memories are scrambled. We need more sessions, but we risk detection every time we link into the system. The watchers monitor neural spikes. Shay put a hand on the detainee's shoulder. We'll keep going, but carefully. If we can gather enough of that data, we might have the encryption key we need. Despite the physical pain of these sessions, something about them fueled the detainee. It was the slow unraveling of a knot. Though each memory fragment was a puzzle piece, glimpses of the bigger picture were tantalizingly close. As the contraption whirred, he clung to the hope that maybe he wasn't the villain the system claimed him to be. One day, while cleaning a corridor near the maze's perimeter, the detainee heard distant screaming. It echoed strangely, reverberating off unseen walls. He froze, scanning for the source. The other detainees around him, blank-faced, simply carried on, as if they didn't hear anything, or maybe they'd learned to ignore it. He set aside the cleaning instrument and crept down the hall, letting a drone pass overhead unnoticed. The screams led him to a sealed door marked with a hazard symbol. Through a narrow window, he glimpsed a swirl of digital static in an otherwise empty chamber. Yet the screams were louder here, tortured and resonant. Then, as suddenly as they'd begun, they cut out. Only a distant hum remained. He felt nauseated, unsettled. With no passcode or key, there was no way to open the door. But the moment stuck in his mind. The maze was no mere rehabilitation. Something else, something horrifying, lurked within its sub-levels. That night, he told Shay about what he heard. She paled. Rumors say that's the place where detainees who can't be fixed are taken for permanent disposal. It's also rumored that some detainees endure forced mind extractions, though I can't confirm any of it. She inhaled sharply. We have to hurry. The watchers were not fools. The Sentinel drones had begun to hover more frequently near the group's secret alcove. Twice, they had nearly found them in mid-session, but Shay managed to jam their sensors for a few precious moments. The tension was palpable. One mistake, and they would all vanish like so many others. Still, the group persisted. Each time the detainee hooked into the contraption, a fresh series of memories surfaced. He caught fleeting impressions. Standing in a grand, polished office with tinted glass walls holding a small data chip. Someone in the corner, weeping. The face of the orientation man, named Blackwell, if the memory served, smiling smugly. In the half-remembered scene, the detainee was furious, shouting at Blackwell, demanding answers about a project called Algorithmic Behavioral Correction. Then there was an argument, a scuffle, a flash of fear, and a single gunshot. He came out of that memory trembling, sweat pouring down his face. Shay's grip on his shoulder tightened. "What is it?" she asked, her own voice quavering. I think I shot him," the detainee whispered, horror building in his chest. "I remember the recoil, the smell of gunpowder. Why would I do that?" Mako frowned, scanning the readout. This system might be weaving illusions, or perhaps you did shoot him, but maybe it was in self-defense. The detainee's thoughts spun. If he had killed Blackwell, it could explain why Blackwell's face now appeared as some kind of authority figure controlling this place. Could Blackwell have survived and engineered a personal vendetta? The lines between truth and memory began to blur. Guilt gnawed at him. Even if his actions were justified, had he committed a heinous act that deserved punishment? Shay took his hand gently. "We won't abandon you," she vowed. "We'll find the truth, and we'll get out." Armed with partial codes extracted from several group members, Mako believed they had enough to attempt a deeper infiltration of the maze's framework. They planned a dangerous incursion into the prison's underlayers, the digital core where administrators manipulated reality at will. It involved sneaking past Sentinel patrols, descending into sub-basement corridors that flickered in and out of existence. In the dead of the artificial night, they moved. The detainee led the way with Shay and Mako close behind. They encountered locked gates with glowing holographic panels. One by one, Mako hacked them, each success a nerve-wracking wait for an alarm that could sound any second. At last, they reached the heart of the maze, a vast chamber dominated by a cylindrical tower of swirling light. It pulsed in rhythmic patterns, feeding data to every inch of the digital prison. Terminals lined the walls, each staffed by silent, half-awake technicians. Their eyes were glazed, as if they too were detainees forced into labor. In the darkness, Shay pointed to a vacant console. They slipped behind it. Mako plugged in a small device, lines of code flooding the screen. "Come on. Come on," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. "If we input your encryption fragments in the correct sequence, it should open a back door into the maze's core logs." Suddenly, a siren whooped. Red lights flashed. The overhead speakers boomed, "Security breach." All detainees return to your cells immediately. Sentinel drones emerged in a menacing swarm, scanning the chamber with strobing lights. Mako worked frantically, eyes darting between lines of code. Shay and the detainee stood guard, hearts hammering. A sentinel glided closer, a faint mechanical whine emanating from it. Shay tensed, preparing for the worst. "Got it!" Mako hissed, pulling the device free. "We need to run, now!" They sprinted away as the drones converged. Light beams traced their path, but the trio managed to slip into a narrow service vent. Crawling through darkness, they reached the safety of an abandoned corridor. Only once they sealed the vent behind them did they dare to breathe. Mako clutched the device to his chest. "I have the logs," he panted. "We just need to decode them." But a wave of dread washed over the detainee. That security breach alarm would make them prime targets. And it was only a matter of time before the watchers closed in. They retreated to the secret alcove, hooking Mako's device to their makeshift terminal. The code logs scrolled on the screen, everyone crowded around. Accessing maze core logs. Administrator. Blackwell. Luthor Project. Algorithmic behavioral correction. A series of file names and references flickered by. Memory whitewash procedure. Cognitive conditioning protocol. Dissident interrogation reports. Shay's eyes flashed with outrage. So it's not just a prison. They're experimenting on detainees, rewriting minds, collecting neural data. For profit? Mako brought up another file. Subject 9630. Everyone paused. The detainee's heart thudded in his ears. He watched lines of text appear, reading Subject 9630. Name, Damon Rook. Formerly employed as a data security analyst within Blackwell Technologies. Charged with attempted murder of CEO Luther Blackwell. Motive: exposing algorithmic behavioral correction, an illegal reconditioning program meant for mass population control. Status: brainwave reformat complete. Memory suppressed. The detainee, Damon Rook, staggered back, words stuck in his throat. "I tried to kill him," he whispered. Shay laid a hand on his arm. "You were trying to expose him. That means you discovered Blackwell's project. Maybe you realized what he was doing was monstrous, so you confronted him." Mako nodded grimly. "He probably pinned the blame on you. Faked his own death, or survived the shooting, then used the system to label you a criminal and lock you in here because you knew too much. He's continuing his mind control experiment on detainees to perfect it before unleashing it on the outside world." The weight of the truth pressed down on Damon like a lead blanket. He had been fighting for justice, and for that he had been turned into a prisoner. He clenched his fists, a renewed resolve lighting up his eyes. We have to stop him. If the world learns what's happening here, maybe we can free everyone. Shay nodded, lips taut. We leak these core logs, prove what Blackwell is doing. But how do we reach the outside? Mako tapped the screen. Blackwell left some back door open for data transmissions. If we can break into the main network link, we can upload these logs. But it's going to draw every drone in the maze. We won't have much time. They planned for hours, selecting the moment when the maze's security routine was at its slowest. Under the flickering lights, Damon steeled himself. He was no longer just a nameless detainee. He was Damon Rook, a man who had risked everything to protect others from mind control. And he was going to finish what he started. Shay, Mako, and a handful of other rebels gathered near the maze's central data tower once again. This time, they were armed with improvised EMP grenades crafted from sabotaged drone parts to disrupt the Sentinel swarm. At the stroke of the artificial midnight cycle, they launched their assault. The first EMP wave exploded in white arcs of electricity, sending nearby drones careening into walls. Sirens blared, klaxons screaming. Red lights flashed as the maze recognized a full-scale rebellion. Damon sprinted through the chaos, occasionally ducking behind crates. He saw other detainees caught in the crossfire, some cowering, others making a desperate bid for freedom. Shay and Mako followed close behind, their faces set with determination. They reached the central data tower again, forcing their way past panicked technicians. Mako plugged in the device to an open console. Code poured across the screen like a roaring waterfall of data. Sentinel drones converged, beams crisscrossing the room. Shay hurled another EMP, disabling half of them. But more arrived, each one scanning with lethal intent. Damon dove behind a console, forcing the drones to pivot. He spotted a control panel labeled Virtual Restraint Protocol, presumably the safety net that locked everyone's minds in place. If he could sabotage it, maybe detainees could break free. He typed furiously at the panel. Sparks flew overhead as Shay tried to keep the drones at bay. Then, a harsh beep. An override request. A red box flashed. Administrator code required. And that was when the great screen at the chamber's front flickered to life, revealing the face Damon remembered all too well, Luther Blackwell. "You just couldn't stay put, could you, Damon?" Blackwell said, voice cold and mocking. "Trying to be the hero again, but your mind is still property of this facility. I gave you a second chance. This is how you repay me?" Damon's teeth ground together. "You're the criminal, Blackwell. You can't hide your twisted experiments forever." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what I plan to do. You and your ragtag rebels are about to be erased permanently. Then I'll move on with my glorious vision for the future of humankind." Behind them, a volley of lasers from the drones crackled overhead, forcing them to take cover. Shay screamed as a near miss singed the metal near her head. Mako slammed a final keystroke into the terminal. "Upload in progress. I just need 1 more minute." Damon turned to face the giant screen. He saw a blinking icon waiting for an access code. His heart pounded. How could he break the last layer of encryption without Blackwell's code? Then he remembered the memory fragments. Somewhere in his mind, a piece of Blackwell's code might be hidden. Summoning every ounce of will, he pressed the neural cable to his temple. He linked directly to the console. Agony flooded his senses as he forcibly recalled every flicker of his lost confrontation with Blackwell. Data rushed by in glowing streams. Memories slammed into him. The confrontation in Blackwell's office, the data chip he'd stolen, the lines of code he'd memorized to blow the whistle. The code was etched deep in his mind, a string of alphanumeric characters. Through the haze of pain, he typed them in. Admin code accepted. The control panel's locks dissolved. A new prompt appeared. Deactivate virtual restraint protocol? Without hesitation, Damon selected yes. A shudder coursed through the entire prison. Walls flickered, revealing the underlying digital grid. All across the maze, detainees froze as their neural implants momentarily short-circuited. Then, one by one, they regained clarity. Some screamed as buried memories surfaced. Others stared in shocked silence, tears streaming down their faces. "You can't do this!" Blackwell's voice thundered over the speakers. "I own this system!" Mako let out a triumphant cry. "Our upload is complete. The logs, everything is out there." He tapped furiously at the console, ensuring the data broadcast. In the screen's corner, Damon could see transmissions pinging an external server. The maze's dirty secrets were about to flood the outside world. Blackwell's image crackled with fury. "Damon Rook, you have no idea what you've—" But his rant was cut short by a massive power surge. The data tower overloaded, arcs of electricity dancing along its surface. Circuits burst, the swirling lights inside dimming to an eerie glow. The entire chamber trembled under the instability of the reality it housed. Shay grabbed Damon's arm. "We have to go!" All around them, detainees emerged from the flickering illusions that no longer held them captive. The maze's corridors fractured, some collapsing into polygon shards. Together, rebels and detainees rushed for the exit. Drones spiraled erratically, no longer following stable commands. As Damon ran, he saw entire walls flicker out of existence, replaced by blank code or swirling static. The prison was collapsing from within, undone by the force of its own truth. He heard distant roars, explosions, frightened cries, but also exhilarated shouts of freedom. At a far end of the corridor, a white portal flickered, a glitch in the maze's boundary. Wordlessly, Shay and Mako headed for it, guiding others behind them. One by one, detainees vanished as they stepped through, some crying, some laughing hysterically. Damon paused at the threshold, heart thrumming. He turned back, glimpsing the maze's final collapse. He felt a shred of sorrow for all the lost time, the broken minds forced to endure Blackwell's cruelty. But now, there was hope that the outside world would see the truth. Maybe justice would follow. With a deep breath, Damon Rook stepped through the portal. Light, real daylight, not the neon haze of the maze, struck Damon's eyes, nearly blinding him. He staggered onto a steel platform in a massive facility, cables and wires trailing from mechanical pods the size of coffins. All around him lay rows of these pods, many now cracking open as disoriented prisoners emerged. Beneath giant windows, Shay and Mako stood, breathing in the taste of real air. A handful of security guards lay unconscious or fled. Alarms droned in the distance, red lights swirling. The entire facility looked on the verge of being overrun by freed detainees. Outside the windows, bright sunlight glowed on an unfamiliar cityscape. Shay caught Damon's gaze. "We did it," she said, voice trembling. He nodded, uncertain what awaited them in the real world. But their job was only half done. The public needed to know about Blackwell's atrocities, and with the data they had uploaded, the revelations would come fast. Investigators, media, the entire corrupt network would be dragged into the light. Though the path ahead was full of unknown dangers, Damon felt an unyielding resolve. He might face trial for his alleged crime, but now at least the truth was out. Blackwell would have to answer for his deeds, and every prisoner, forcibly locked in that digital nightmare, had a second chance at life. In that moment, as the morning sun illuminated countless awakened souls, Damon saw real freedom for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The maze was gone, and with it, the illusions that had bound them. He placed a hand over his racing heart, breathing in the crisp air. If there was a future worth fighting for, it was this one, beyond the prison of code, forged in the fires of truth and written upon the blank slate of an unbroken mind.